Portland, Maine. Hello, everybody there in the Irish Heritage Center in Portland, Maine, and hello especially to Michael Connolly, a joint literary figure now in the Irish diaspora in Maine, to Becky and to all of the Connolly clan on this very special evening for them. If it were even murky overhead, I'd like to be with you. We cannot be, the world is different. Indeed, it's murky overhead here too in Cardiff. Sometimes your history is also murky. It's battles, it's people lost their lives, it's great changes, it's empires falling, it's statistics about immigration and what happened to people. But I think Michael Connolly's book, Michael, your book, I think humanises history. It links us to real people, fictionalised, I know, but very real people in the bigger scheme of things. Their trials and tribulations as immigrants, the way that they had to try and keep coal on the fire through all sorts of tricks, the way they were humiliated in so many ways by the things they had to do in order to keep their families in good health and educate them in a land far away which they were new to. Michael, you're a fine storyteller, and you bring that through your cultural genetics. Your storytelling, I think, comes from your heartland and your homeland, your ancestral homeland of Minish and Calafinish. That's where they told stories around the turf fires of long ago. All that was brought across the Atlantic, and those stories were told in the hard work and in the little time they had down at the harbour in Portland, Maine. And those stories were also told around the coal fires of Moonshine Hill. Congratulations on your book. It's a job well done, and we hope indeed to have you launch the book one more time here, your heartland and your homeland, and the Immigrant Centre in Cardiff next year. Colleen Mahabi, and a strong vote.
Michael Connolly, all the best on the launch of that wonderful novel, Murky Overhead. And here I am today, between Mike Cullen and Spiddle, up on the bog, overlooking Galway Bay to the south, the Aran Islands, our beautiful mountains in North Connemara, the Bannabola, the 12 Pins, and your own great mountain there in view as well, Crookmowrdon. Great novel, Michael. Good on you for capturing the great people, women and men that came from here, that came from the Furbo, on Spiddle, Ingerbon, Invern, Cornamona, Corn, settled in Portland, including my own relatives. Good on you, Michael, for keeping them in memory for life. And the rest I'll say in song.
Amen, Trilig, Warrige, no slate wando here. Scan hinach do, vam och skibruchten, achen ranoch lasen frio. On schnachte van wassarum, san rira wadochim, smevel korole, motamin mon, near wad the Wembley, where I 3 leagues upon the sea, or in mountains far from land, and not a single soul for company, save the fern and heather grand. Snowflakes falling down on me, and a fierce wind blowing them away. But to converse once more with Tanny, my store, these long nights would not delay.
Congratulations, Michael. It's a wonderful book, and I have learned so much about Irish Portland and about its strong connection to Connemara. And I really felt like reading the book, like I've been able to leave the world I'm in at the moment and become part of the world of Portland of over 100 years ago. And to have the feeling for what sea smoke is like on a cold morning when you get up, before it gets light out, and the danger of being on a boat and unloading coal, and the kind of workplace tensions and yet the humor, and just all the little details of friendships. And I love the structure of it. I love the way he really begins it with a dream. I mean, they're almost like bookends in a way, but they're dreams of this continuum between Ireland, between the west of Ireland, between Connemara and Portland. Well, I love the way Mike splices up this and really so sensitively puts together the entire day. And really, you get to move through the city. Very much a lot of the movement happens between the two women who are very close friends, between Mary Foley and her friend Nora Ward. So it's really an amazing adventure with them. The bloss of the goyga, the Irish being spoken, and the proverbs, and really the picture of Portland, of ethnic Portland, of Italian Portland, of Jewish Portland. I mean, I would just say also that I enjoyed the way Mike tied together these threads. I mean, largely through the three characters, through Coley and through Mary, and through the children, but mostly through Johnny and the experiences he has during the school day. Johnny, the oldest, who's about 16, is what Mike terms as mitching. He's skipping school through the day, but he has all of these mind-opening kinds of experience. I mean, some life lessons in that, there's a friend who kind of lets him down in the beginning. They go off on some mischief, and then they go up for a hilarious adventure, and then every other chapter you get to see what Coley's experiencing at work, and what the issues are at work, and what a big difference a lunch break, the longshoreman's noon, makes to them, and how they have to defend it. And he doesn't candy coat anything. He shows how there are limits, how you can only give what you can afford to, but to the limit that people can, and they're living very close to the edge oftentimes, that they are generous to their neighbors. So you get this kind of sense in your gut about how hard scrabble the life is, and yet how close people are. The way that Mike brings the book to a close, he's really, I think, more than anybody in the book, it's the two women and their friendship. He shows this whole theme of maternal connection. I think it comes out again and again, how the very fine points of forming a life for young people, and maybe on some occasions diffusing possible problems, but the sense that there's a larger family of neighbors that really help each other get along. 2 summers ago, Mary Concannon and I were very kindly invited up to Portland by Mike to interview Claire Foley and Peggy Hayden and Maura Donegan. And that's a day I'll never forget. We had a fantastic time. Everywhere we went, Mike knows exactly what happened there, not only a decade or 2 decades ago, but 100 years ago, and was able to tell us, point to this or that, and tell us, who lived there and what had happened. And that's a sense that everyone will get from reading this book as well. It's been really a privilege to work with Michael, and Mike has helped enormously with the Irish language oral history project, and I really can't thank him enough, for the time we had, and for the interviews, and really for giving a kind of a sense of how the interviews and how the lives of people in Portland connected with all of this.
Hello, Michael and Becky and everyone gathered at your event. I hope to be there, but just in case, I wanted to record this little testimonial. I'm very proud of you, Michael, for finishing this wonderful novel and for being able to enjoy it over the summer. I know you'd been working on it for a while. I think you told me that the pandemic certainly helped give you a little bit of extra time and concentration at home to finish it, but it's a great work. And it's really the logical conclusion or culmination, I would say, of all your prior works, including They Change Their Skies, which I have, and which is just a superb collection of essays on the lives of the longshoremen in Portland and the life of the Irish in Portland, Maine, which is the city I was born in and was raised in, and proudly so. And then it's also, in many ways, a nice culmination of your work with me on the John Ford collection, John Ford in Focus. And I know you also have your monograph based on your dissertation about the lives of the Portland Irish longshoremen. So I can't think of a better way to cap all that work in prior years than with this wonderful novel, which introduces us to characters, mostly real life characters from the city at that time. I love your idea of basing it all on one day in the life of an Irish family, sort of like Joyce's Ulysses, the one day journey of Leopold Bloom. It's written very clearly, very crisply. I enjoyed the writing style. It was very engaging. Of course, I knew many of these characters, but not all of them. Especially, learning things such as the fact that William Jennings Bryan came to Portland to give a speech. I didn't know about that before, and that plays a role in the novel. References to local politics, figures like Thomas Brackett Reed, who was there that day for the speech that Bryan gave. Being a John Ford scholar and working with you on John Ford in the past, it was great to see the references to the Feeney family, not only to the father, John Feeney, and his famous saloon at Gorham's Corner, which was a hub of local culture and politics, but also, of course, references to young John Feeney, who became the great John Ford, the world's greatest filmmaker as far as I'm concerned, and a favorite filmmaker of many other great filmmakers like Fellini and Ingmar Bergman and Akira Kurosawa, Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas. They all worship John Ford. So he plays a role in your novel, and rightly so, but at a tender young age. And you also make reference to his brother Frank, or Francis, who went out to Hollywood before him and became a pioneering filmmaker and author. So I knew you'd probably include those references to the Feeneys and to young John Ford, but it was just great to see how it played out and to hear them engaged in conversations that you had imagined in your mind. References to famous buildings that I know well from Portland. I used to live right around the corner from St. Dominic's Church, and you give references to the history of the church and also to the fact that there was some real discrimination against the Irish back then. And of course, that happened to the Feeney family and was probably one of the reasons they moved from Cape Elizabeth, where John Ford was born, young John Feeney, and why they came into Portland was because of discrimination. And so that was an important thing to mention, I think. Other places that I didn't know so well, but had only heard references to, like the Seamen's Reading Room, learning more about the lives of the longshoremen, but instead of being delivered, in sort of dry historical descriptions, it's in the lives of characters, so you can really get into their minds to see what they were, and their feelings to see what they were enduring and suffering through, and the joys that they lived through, as well as the challenges. So this is a great work, Michael. I think it's the proper culmination of all of your prior works. It's a great way to really bring all the threads together, I think, in an entertaining, amusing way. I hope that there will be many readers of the work. I'll certainly be mentioning it to many people. I guess the one other thing I'd mention, besides the fact that I've enjoyed so much getting to know you and Becky so well, and to enjoy fine dinners at your home, and particularly our concentrated time working on the John Ford book, I wanted to mention that I really like the use of quotes in the book. You picked out some great ones. There are passages from Longfellow's poems. And since I teach philosophy, I love the fact that you used this wonderful quote from the I Ching toward the very end of the book, which deals with, well, it says that the location may change, but the source always remains the same, and it's never exhausted. And that's a nice, including that, it gives your book certainly a more of a cross-cultural dimension, and I think that's a great quote. You can always change your location, but the source stays the same. I suppose for some people that might be a divine source, but also the source of your traditions, family values, rituals that have been handed down to you. And obviously in your novel, the source is the culture of Ireland and how it was transported across the Atlantic to Portland, and to take shape in terms of our own beloved Irish community here. So great work, Michael. I hope to be with you for your event, and I hope that you have another book project in mind and that you continue the good work. So thank you.
I think that all of us would agree tonight that Michael O'Connell, Mike Connolly, is a multi-talented man. We know for years, many of us here, that he's been a ceoltóid, a musician, playing with the Cayley Band all through Portland and Maine and different places. We also met him as a scribhneoid, a writer, as he introduced us to Folan, to the Folan family, in this beautiful book called Murky Overhead. We met the Folans, their family, their neighbors, and being a very, very good múinteoir, teacher, he explained to us clearly throughout the book aspects of the history of not only Ireland, but our own nation and Portland, to put the lives of the Colons in historical context and to illuminate the reasons behind the actions that they took, the feelings that they had, and why life was as it was here in Portland in the late 1800s, early 1900s. But I think there's one other talent that probably he's not aware of, but it came to mind as I was reading the book. And I think I would add another oid to it. If you notice, I had a ceoltóid, a scribhneoid, and a múinteoid, and the last one right now would be a fídóid. And a fídóid is a weaver. Now, I'm sure Michal never thought of himself as a weaver, but indeed he is. He had the skill of weaving strands of Irish language all through the book. The place names, Callaweense, Casharga, Muinish. The character names, Philippine, Catavidanach, so many others. The prayers, the poetry, the song that Sean O'Custula so nicely presented this evening is presented in the book. Those were the strong cultural strands that run through this book. Those were the same strong cultural strands that tethered the Portland Irish to Ireland, especially the FBI, as they were called in the early 1900s, meaning the foreign-born Irish. That first group, they were tethered by their language and by their faith to Ireland. They lived together in a very small, concentrated area. The people of Casharaga, the people of Connemara, the people of Currnamoona. I believe the Casharagas were down this way, and the Currnamoons, as the Casharaga people call them, were up that way, up the hill, that direction. And I believe when this hall and the one upstairs was filled with pews, after the pews emptied out on a Sunday, I think there were many disputes out on Gray Street and State Street and around between the Casharagas and the Currnamoons. Many things were left unsettled, both in English and in Irish. But the Irish ones carried on longer, I'm sure. So it's a testimony to Micheál, the way he took the Irish language and wove it so deftly through the story, because it mirrored the life of the people here in Portland. Portland was a unique and is a unique place, but especially back in that time, the people that came from those areas of Casharaga, Currnamoona, and back in Carna. That's a small area geographically, and they were put into a small area here. And they stayed amongst themselves, and their language survived in the first generation. And now, many, many threads later, those threads may be tenuous, they may be a bit frayed with the homeland, but still they're there in the language and the culture, as is displayed by the turnout of people here tonight and the interest in this book. So there's another town, the town that I come from in Massachusetts, called Norwood. And many of the relatives of the same exact people that were here, their family was in Norwood. And it was almost a mirror image of Portland. Here they had the longshore. In Norwood, we had the paper factories. It was the same story, two different states, but the same life. So I'll add on one more ode to Micheál tonight, and we'll call him a Gaelgoid. And a Gaelgoid is an Irish speaker, and he has been, and he is, and Lekunde will continue to do so. So on that note, Micheál, I want to say Cóthárteachas. And as Mary Folan said in the book, she said, to Mary Folan, Portland was and always has been a little bit of Galway that had somehow dislodged and floated across the Atlantic, forced ever westward, possibly by some great Atlantic gale. Well, thank goodness that that wind blew so strong and took them here and got us all to this point and to this wonderful evening and this beautiful book. Cóthárteachas a bhíall. Anis tá beann seo as rialtas na Héireann, agus bhfuailim Ord Consul na Héireann, Líosa Mór a chud in Anna Ghíb. We have a representative of the Irish government here this evening, Líosa Mór, the Consul General of Ireland. Líosa. Pick up speed.
Thank you, Mary, for your warm words of welcome and also for that lovely tribute to Micheál and all his talents. Good evening, everybody. As Mary said, I'm Líosa Mór. I'm Ireland's Consul General to New England, and I am so happy to be here, and I'm so happy that you delighted me, that you invited me to be part of this very special evening, Michael. I know some of you that are here this evening. For anybody that doesn't know me, I've been in Boston just over 2 years, but I haven't been in Portland, Maine for a year and a half because of the pandemic and everything that's happened. But I was just reflecting this evening, I've actually this must be my third or fourth visit to Portland, because it's not an exaggeration to say I love coming here so much, because it's a really beautiful place, and also because of the really, really strong connections to Ireland that we have all seen. And I think for many people, there are people here who I've met that have been born and bred in Ireland and have moved over and made their home here, but there's many people whose links to Ireland go back multiple generations. But the really striking thing to me is, though, even those links are distant, they're still very, very strongly held and cherished. And it is striking to me that when I come and visit, people still ask me about Ireland now, what's going on with Ireland and the Good Friday Agreement, what's going on with Ireland and Brexit. People really feel those links really strongly. So they may be distant, but those links and those friendships, as we've seen from the wonderful videos, are very strong. And that brings me to this book, because it's going to be my very great pleasure to introduce Micheál, as we almost call him forevermore, I think. To say a few words. So Michael he's a lifelong resident of Portland, Maine. He's from Munjoy Hill, and one of the new things that I learned on this particular visit to Portland was about the great rivalries between the two parishes that I think one of the previous speakers alluded to. There's the Brackett Street area, which I think is here, and then the Munjoy Hill area, which is where Michael is from, in the east end of the city. Michael has studied in Ireland. He got his MA from University College Dublin, and then a PhD in history from Boston College. He's written, as many people have said here this evening, he's written several academic books on Portland, and specifically Portland's Irish links. So They Changed Their Sky, which is about the longshoremen. He's written about John Ford, as has been mentioned as well. And this is his first foray into fiction. Michael tells me he's recently retired after 36 years of teaching at St. Joseph's College in Standish, Maine. I had been under the impression that when he retired, he started writing this book, but I gather he's been writing it in some form or other for a lot longer than that, so it's great to see it come to its conclusion. Murky Overhead, as we have heard, deals with an Irish family living in Portland in 1900, and it takes place over a single day, like Joyce's Ulysses, as has been mentioned in January. And other people have spoken at length about the book and its characters and what it says, and I just want to say, having read it, well, I'm still in the process of reading it, I haven't finished it yet, but it really does, in a very, very striking way, bring to life what life was like for those people. When I was reading it, the thing that really struck me was you can really tell that it was a historian who wrote this book, because the attention to detail in it is absolutely remarkable. Michael told me that when he was writing this book, he drew inspiration from the stories that his families and his grandparents and other people would tell him about what life was like in those days. And that really shines through, because this is a work of fiction, a work of historical fiction, but I think in a very real way, it's also an oral history of Portland, the Portland Irish, but the city of Portland and that time. And because he has written this book, we will have this forever. We will have those oral histories. So it's as well as being a novel and something to read to inform yourself in an entertainment, it is also, I think, in a really tangible way, an oral history contribution to the Irish in Portland. So I'm going to give Michael a chance to say a few words this evening, but just to say, Cogordus, Micheál, it's an absolutely wonderful book. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of a very special event, and I understand you're already working on the next one, so I'm looking forward to reading it. Thank you very much, everyone.
3 or 4 of the best days of my life were held here in this place, launching books, and today with this wonderful sized crowd, even though we have a pandemic that's raging all around us. I see many of you, most of you wearing masks to honor that idea. This is, again, ranks right up there with the other book launches that I've done and the acceptance of the Claddagh Award. So thank you all for making this a special night and for supporting the Maine Irish Heritage Center. I'd like to say that a couple of words of thanks before we get started. And I know that Jean is around here somewhere, and she's going to be, oh, there she is. And she's going to be supporting me. And she's also watching the clock, because somebody said once that I can go on and on. So I'll try not to. But the first thing I want to say is that family is all important in this book. And having my brother Peter and my sister Mary here is so important to me. And I'm so thankful they could be here, along with my life partner, my Anam Cara, Becky, that many of you know, Becky Hitchcock. So I'm so glad that they could be here with me tonight. Thanks to Leisha Moore for what she has done tonight, and for what she has done in the past for Portland, and for being a testimonial on the book as well, even though she hadn't really read a lot of it before that. So I thank her for that. Other testimonials included Joe Brennan. I hear he's from the east end of Portland as well. And Marty Walsh, who's related to me through marriage. And the one thing, the thread that runs between the three of us is that I had a grandfather from Califinish. Joe Brennan's mother, a Mulcairn, was from Califinish, and Marty Walsh's father was from Califinish. So a very small townland for three political or historical people. Thank you for the people that were on the tape that you saw earlier. Kevin Sturr, I don't know, is Kevin here tonight? There he is up in the back. Thank you, Kevin, for coming. Brian Frickenberg, Sean O'Costola, he's always an actor and he's a great singer as well. And Auron Winsha is our song, the Song of Weenish, where our Nora Lee and Mary Joyce came from on our side of the family. And of course, Marcin O'Cahan. Thanks for the introductions tonight, Mary Concannon. Very special to have Mary here with her love for the Irish language and her accomplishments, and especially the way that she's so highly regarded in Galway, her master's degree from University College Galway. And again, to Leisha for her comments. Three key women helped me in the course of this. I don't know, is Rebecca Blazing here this evening? Rebecca was the designer for the front and back cover, but I would like two people who I know are here tonight to stand, if they would. Holly Reedy. Is Holly, did she have to go? She was here earlier. If you look up to the front of the room here, you'll see the work of artistry that Holly Reedy created that is the front cover for the book. And it's not the first time she has done that for me. If you look at They Changed Their Sky, she also provided that. So she's a great, wonderful person. But the person I definitely want to stand up is Mary Ann Hildreth. Where are you, Mary Ann? Mary Ann is married to Mike Lyons, and together they run Tower Publishing, which published this book. But Mary Ann was so much more than that. She was so much fun to work with. And as she asked me questions and made corrections and worked on the book, I knew that it was going to be a book that I was happy with, because she was very happy with it. And it's very special for me to have Mary Ann here tonight. Thank you so much. Charles Todorich, where are you, Charles? Over here, Mike. Over there, because he introduced me to Mike Lyons, and without that connection, I don't know if the book would have been published. Kathleen Flaherty has sold more books than any other person here. Kathleen's here somewhere tonight. Oh, there she is. Yes. And she's expecting a reward, my sister tells me, so I'm going to buy her anything she wants from that table over there tonight and put it on my sister's charge card. Okay, obviously the two musicians, two of the best Irish musicians in the whole state of Maine, Kevin McElroy and Junior Stevens, Kristen Stevens. The Maine Irish Heritage Center, Mary McElhaney, always, Hannah Marcel. And this lady here, who has become a mainstay for everything that goes on in the Heritage Center now. My timer hasn't started yet. Jean Haney has put together those testimonials that you saw and what you're about to see. So she's just remarkable to work with, and her spirit is, as much as anything, not just her technological skills, but her spirit is at the center of what she's offering here. And we all thank her so much. So finally, I will say one last thing. You will see this on the back of the book. Step into their lives for one day. See what makes them laugh. Feel what makes them cry. It's the only part of the book that I didn't write. This woman up here, my Anam Kanara, Becky wrote that, and I thank her for everything she does. So step back and enjoy what we're going to see now. These are images that Jean and I and Hannah worked with, and these are central to Portland in the year 1900. The novel actually begins in the fog. This is sea smoke, which you see on a cold January day. It means a lot to me. In fact, that was the early title of the book, Sea Smoke, but I changed it otherwise. It's nice to get up in the morning when the sun begins to shine, 4 or 5 or 6 o'clock in the good old summertime. But when the snow is snowing and it's murky overhead, sure, it's nice to get up in the morning, but it's better to stay in bed. Some images of Portland. This would be taken from South Portland, looking over from the Dyer shipyard. Over you can see Munjoy Hill on your right and some of the cathedral buildings that were there. Some of those buildings, those churches are no longer in Portland, but you can see the cathedral. Portland is a peninsula, obviously. We have our own back bay. We had our back bay before they did, I believe. I don't know. Anyway, you can see the wonderful waterfront that we have that was rationalized when they laid Commercial Street, but that was not until 1850. Before that, it was a very jagged waterfront. Here's other pictures of that. You can see the Grand Trunk there, pretty much in the middle. Some of you would, how many remember the Grand Trunk building? A few. Richard Rangan, you're not old enough to remember that. Okay. Now, this novel takes place in January, on the 31st of January. January the 1st, month of the year, 31st, the last day of the year, 1900, either the last day of one century or the first day of another, depending on your... I wanted it to be on the edge of everything. And certainly we had our cold winters. Sometimes we get ice storms up here, and they're much worse than snowstorms, and they can be devastating. This might be taken from Munjoy Hill. It kind of looks like the edge of the promenade there. And aren't these the kind of snowstorms that we used to get? Yeah. Yes. Now, in the early part of the book, a ship comes in, the Avona, and these stories are taken from the newspapers of the time, and it was covered over with ice. It made a very treacherous crossing. Imagine being on a ship like this with ice covering it. You've seen the deadliest catch, and that's what they were going through at the time as well. Here's a ship that's loaded from the front because they're taking on lumber, and it's hard to get a long piece of lumber in through the hull of the ship, so they have to put it in. We just hope that the hatch is very securely fastened. Other beautiful images of the waterfront. If you walk on the waterfront today on the right day, you see images like this still. And more still. And still more. All equally beautiful. Coal was the energy source of the day. And coal was the major commodity coming into Portland. Canadian grain was the major commodity going out of Portland. And here's a picture of Randall and McAllister. Randall and McAllister was one of 3 of the big companies that imported coal, mainly from Hampton Roads and from other parts of Virginia. Here's the John Randall, again at a coal pocket. You can see the size of it on the right. So they would load the coal there and then onto rail cars and out to SD Warren or other places. And coal, of course, didn't just run industries like the paper industry. It also heated people's homes. And my brother Peter, and probably not Mary, can remember us getting coal at home. And on a good year, a very good year, we would buy anthracite coal because it was more expensive, but it burned better. But on a slack year, we would have to buy bituminous coal. And here's some people shoveling. And of course, Coley goes off every day to shovel coal. And he can't make any excuses for it. Another picture of Randall and McAllister, and you see both the words bituminous and anthracite on that. These are down on Commercial Street. Okay, I think you're all in for a treat. I know I am. Is Joe Muir here by any chance? Joe Muir runs a business in Portland called Black and White Images. And he created this image for me. He digitized it from the only image that I know of multiple longshoremen. And in digitizing it, he made possible what Jean is now going to show you. And for many of you, I think this might be the highlight of the evening. When I showed that picture to Hannah and she put her mouse on it and clicked it and came in close, it almost took my breath away because I'm not very technologically gifted and I didn't know you could do that. And again, look what Jean has done with this. And these were the people that made Portland what it is. Was Coley Folan in there? Absolutely, but I don't know what he looked like. We don't really have images of him. Were some of your relatives in there? I'm sure they were. So to me, this was very, very touching. And maybe that's all that needed to be shown tonight was that image. That kind of speaks for itself. Yeah. Peter and Mary will recognize this, and any of you that have read the book already will recognize this. Mary Joyce came, this was her little house, her tiny little cottage in Ireland, according to her legend, which was not true. One evening, she was a little bored with life in Galway, so she climbed out the little hole in the front of her little cabin, crawled over to the edge of Galway Bay, swam all the way out to that sailboat that you see in the distance, and sailed to Portland, Maine. That was her story, and she stuck to it. And so, those of you who have read the book know about Marcasheen's dog named Bran. And this is what I figured he looked like. And he's quite a little character and quite a ruffian as well. Again, looking down in Portland, you've got the cathedral on the left, but you also have the First Baptist Church that was located right across from Lincoln Park. Some of you would remember that. When my mother had her stroke, she couldn't say a lot of words, but she used to talk about the First Baptist. And that was First Baptist Church. Again, you'll give me the privilege, coming from the East End, to say that the Grand Trunk building was pound for pound as beautiful as the as beautiful as the Union Station in the West End. They were both incredibly beautiful buildings. They're both gone. It's a huge loss to the city of Portland. Thank goodness that Portland Landmarks and other groups now are trying to keep this from happening again. But my mother took me onto the last train that went into that building, and I remember very well the mahogany chairs, the marble floor, the beauty of it. Part of history that is gone, like the song about Dublin in the rare old times. Look at that. Look how busy it was. So it wasn't just the depot. These are the rolling stock that would have gone up to Montreal, carrying passengers, but more importantly, carrying grain from Montreal, from Canada down through Montreal to Portland, and then on steamships to all over the world, especially Europe. Again, a view of Portland. Look at probably from the observatory. Jean was asking about were there wooden structures back then. If you look at Munjo Hill now, there's still a lot of the buildings are wooden structures, at least the ones that have lasted. View down Congress Street, again, the City Hall there on the right-hand side, and a Hackney coach on the left. Here we have a view looking down Congress Street toward Monument Square. I'm going to step away from this for a second. Are you able to see this on the top of the flag? Well, I'll read it for you. It says Roosevelt and Fairbanks. Okay, so which Roosevelt? And who the heck is Fairbanks? Well, we had two Roosevelts, right, running for president. And we know that this takes place around the early 1900s. This is from 1904. It's Teddy Roosevelt and Charles Fairbanks. Fairbanks was the candidate and the future vice president with Teddy Roosevelt. The vice presidency had sat empty for 3.5 years after the execution or the assassination of McKinley. And Roosevelt ruled on his own. We didn't have the same constitutional provisions back then for electing a new vice president. So this was Charles Fairbanks, for whom Fairbanks, Alaska is named. When he was a senator, he worked on the boundaries of Alaska. Another image, again, looking down Congress Street toward Monument Square. The cathedral. One of the most important and comical theme in this book was something that happened when the boys went into the cathedral, as Johnny was not Johnny, but the Frank character had promised his mother he would do, and what happened that day was not what they expected, but it was very comical. Again, a story that I heard from Larry Welch, who lived out in Yarmouth. A great story, a very funny story, and a true story. There's the top of the hill as we remembered it. The Portland Observatory, the fire barn, which used to be the place where people would go to vote, and the Congress Street Methodist Church. And so those were the three buildings that symbolized the top of the hill. Of those three, only the observatory, thank goodness, still exists. A view again from the observatory. Portland was called the Forest City for many years. We had a lot of elm trees here, especially the promenade, and look at how much it would be covered in the summertime. This building, early inception and then closer to the present day. I wanted to put this picture in because the women of Galway would have been dressed with Galway shawls. Jean tells me that if she could go out on this picture, that the woman on the left is actually holding a large fish, And so these were fishmongers. Probably that's the Corrib River, and that's probably the Claddagh over there on the other side, and with a kishog on the top carrying seaweed. The Abyssinian Church, which is now undergoing renovation, the third oldest African-American meeting house in America, and beautiful renovations being done to that. If you haven't been by it lately on Newbury Street, you should go by for a look. William Jennings Bryan, 3 times candidate for the Democratic nomination for President of the United States. And for those of you who don't know him, you can probably guess he did not succeed. 1896, 1900, and 1908. He skipped 04 because of Teddy Roosevelt. He did come to Portland on that day. He did give a speech. I followed the speech in the papers, and excerpts of his speech are in the book. And so the reason he came to Portland was because of this man on the right, Arthur Sewell. If you know the Sewell Energy Company from up in Bath, that's the same family. And he was the vice president nominee along with William Jennings Bryan. And this was the man they came to see. Portland's own recently retired Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, Thomas Brackett Reed, sitting in his home and looking out, well known. He gave up the speakership on a matter of principle because he opposed the Spanish-American War and he imposed imperialism. And he thought that that was not a Republican tradition. And many in his party disagreed with him, and therefore he had to leave. Again, a matter of conscience and principle. And it's his statue up in the Western Promenade. This is his home on the corner of Deering and Mellon. Here we come with a nickel drum. We just made up an army. Hurrah for Cox, hurrah for Cox, hurrah for Coxey's army. My Aunt Margaret Pegg used to march down the hallway in our house. Here we come with a nickel drum. And this is the way she would bring us to bed in the evening. Coxey's Army was a historical fact, a group of people who were unemployed and looking for benefits. North School, where many immigrant families historically were taught, including all the Folan children. And my father actually attended there and was a crossing guide. He was very proud of that. Here's some of the many, many children that were there. My mother always also served as a teacher's aide in that building. This you might recognize as the Mother House, the Sisters of Mercy. Now accommodations, and our good friend Claire Foley lived there for the last few years of her life in great comfort and happiness. Prostitution. Prostitution, they say, is the oldest profession. John Ford deals with it in The Informer. He also deals with it in Stagecoach. And trying to give an accurate picture of Portland, not gloss over things, I wanted to portray prostitution as a way that unfortunate people, women, tried to make a living and to try to humanize them. So here's a couple of images of prostitution. You would also see that again in the movie Informer. Again, economic necessity drove most women to this profession. And I hope you like the image of the person in the book who I named Kitty Costigan, although she was based on a real life person that Matt Barker has written about and Bill Barry knows very well, and others who actually lived in Portland. In Ulysses, there's a character called the Citizen, and he had an eye patch. And so I was looking for a character and somebody that was unusual. And so I picked this picture. But then this is the real Citizen, you know, from Ulysses. And the character in the book, Marcus King, if you've gotten to the end of the book, you'll read about Marcus King. And he is anti-Semitic. He's ultra-nationalistic. He doesn't like anybody that's not of his own kind. He certainly doesn't like Jewish rabbis. And when one happened to wander into his East End neighborhood, he tried to pick a fight with him, but he picked on the wrong person when Mary Joyce stood up to him. Childbirth. this is the way most of us know it, with a nurse. But in this period of time, many of the children were born at home, as in the book. And again, I think, I had a lot of help from Becky. I didn't know anything about birth in Charles. Isn't that, what does that character from The Birth of the Nation say? I don't know anything about that. Yeah. Pubs. Somebody once told me that Irish people sometimes frequent pubs. And so this is a scene from inside a pub, not in Portland, but this is a Portland pub. I once told my students, I think it was at St. Joe's, it could have been at USM, that Bryan came to Portland in 1014, and he started the first pub in Portland, and they all wrote it down. And it appeared in my exams, and of course, having said it, I couldn't take off points for that. And I think this is the last image, or the next to the last image. Now, Mary Kincannon and others would know this man. This man lived no more than a stone's throw from this building, Stetson Court, just down on Park Street. He came from Russellville in Cusharaga. He was, according to Dr. Ken Nilsson, one of the most gifted storytellers in the Irish language that he ever interviewed in Nova Scotia, in Portland, in Boston, in New York City. And he was actually absolutely blown away in 1984 when he first met Pat Malone. And if you look at the kitchen that he's in, he didn't change the kitchen for 30, 40, 50 years. But he was still working at the age of 69 as a longshoreman and a Gaelic speaker. So we begin in the fog and we end in the fog. The sea smoke has taken over Portland again. The novel begins with Coley waking up slowly, and it ends with Mary going to sleep slowly. So if you want to read a good novel to put you to sleep, I'll urge you to buy our book. Thank you all very much. At a book launch, reading is a typical thing to do, and as you know, there's not been a reading yet tonight, and I was reticent to do that myself. But I asked two of my colleagues to do so. And so if I could introduce the first one, Dr. Edward Riley, my colleague of the full 36 years that I was at St. Joseph's College, and for several years before that, just retired the year before I did. Just a godsend to St. Joseph's College and to its students. He's widely published many books of haiku, a book on a biography of Sitting Bull, and a book on the history of baseball. So Ed has chosen a small passage for you this evening.
I'd like to read a couple short passages from chapter 1, which I think will give an interesting introduction for those of you who haven't read the novel yet. My focus is going to be on Coleman. And I think these early passages tell us something about kind of the tension that Coleman was feeling between his earlier life in Ireland, and here he is in this new world where he's now been married, and as the novel opens, has 8 children. And his love for the Irish language and his fear that it's going to disappear gradually in Portland. We also really will see very early on what so many people have been talking about, which is the very detailed portrait that we get of Portland, Maine. So a couple of short passages from near the beginning, as Coleman is ready to face a new day. Coleman Folan slowly and reluctantly awoke to the cold darkness of his sparsely furnished bedroom. He had partially shaken off what must have been a bad dream. He had them at times. Yes, it was just another of his bad dreams, like so many that crowded out the happier dreams of earlier times in Ireland. In some ways, he felt relieved to awaken and put it aside, but his stomach was still in knots because this particular dream always seemed so very real, a recurring nightmare that struck at his very core. It always stung and pained him greatly. In the distance, Coleman could hear the mournful, lonely droning of the foghorn at Portland Head, which told him that it could be yet another inclement day of work on the docks. He would likely be confronted either by the mysterious sea smoke, an eerie, swirling kind of harbor fog present only on the most bitterly cold days of the year, or more likely the omnipresent light blowing snow that regularly lessened the visibility here and all along the Maine coast. The midwinter weather had been atrocious lately. The crews of incoming ships were all very much relieved merely to have reached land safely. A local newspaper had recently reported on winter's travail. I quote, "The North Atlantic is a gay old bird at this season of the year, and the steamer people say the season is a terror," end of quote. An officer of a ship that had only recently arrived in Portland reportedly remarked graphically to one of the local longshoremen, "We made practically a submarine passage." When another local attempted to encourage him with the prospect of improved weather by the time of his departure, the officer, an educated man, knowingly responded, "The man who has experienced shipwreck shudders even at a calm sea." Coleman was reminded of the ferocious storms of the previous winter, one of which had claimed the passenger vessel Portland, with a loss of over 100 souls. A local newspaper confirmed his memory of that event. The storm of Monday was a terror only second to the great storms of last year. The article compared conditions lately with those at the time of the loss of the Portland, when the entire New England coast was lined with wreckage. Regardless of the weather, Coleman soon arose in the dark and prepared for another long day of work unloading coal near the Randall and McAllister dock. The most recently arrived steamer had deposited over 3,000 tons of coal. Local business concerns felt that with winter now officially 1 month long, or nearly 1/3 complete, their stock of coal would be sufficient. With such frigid temperatures at this time of the year, however, it would only take one or two unexpected reversals to change matters in an instant, to say nothing of the fate of the poor sailors who delivered this crucial product and faced these threats directly on the open seas, the menacing and unpredictable ocean highway. Today, Coleman would work again on the coal steamer Avona that had arrived the previous day from Louisbourg, Nova Scotia. He was pleased that the labor of unloading this ship would give both him and his gang steady work for the next few days at least. The Avona carried 3,677 tons of coal for the Maine Central Railroad, as well as 250 tons of bunker coal. Its voyage had not been pleasant, and the newspapers reported she came in ice to the bridge and showing in every possible way the evidence of a hard pounding. It was a Wednesday, the last day of January in the year 1900. Coleman thought this would be a day not unlike most other days in his life and the lives of his fellow Irish longshoremen. They were now living in a very different environment, no longer that of Ireland, but now under the chained sky of Portland, Maine. These few moments between his waking and rising were Coleman's own. He would often pleasantly reminisce about the circumstances that had brought him to his present condition. And then I'll skip just a few pages and read a very brief passage as he continues now to really reflect back on when he first arrived in Portland, by now a number of years ago. Within a week, He was working as a longshoreman in a gang that included his uncle and several others from South Connemara, all of whom were Irish speakers like himself. Someone had told him once that Galway had the highest number of Irish speakers in the whole of Ireland, and that the local newspapers reported that this amounted to about 70% of the total population. But that seemed low to Coley because everyone he knew at home, with the exception of a few government workers who periodically ventured out from Clifton or Galway City, spoke Irish. The Galway men were among the last to give up the Irish Gaelic language, even here in Portland. There were still a few who could speak no English at all, but they seemed to somehow get along just fine as long as they remained within the Irish neighborhoods. One such person had recently returned to Carna after nearly 2 years in America, and Coley was told by one who knew this man well, almost boastfully, even then, he had hardly a single word of English on him. While this made Coley feel at home and comfortable to be among his own kind, he instinctively knew that in order to get ahead in Portland, sooner or later, he and especially his children would have to succumb to this new language and many of America's other peculiar cultural customs and styles. This eventually became even more apparent in later years after his marriage, and especially after the arrival of children, now numbering 8. Coley also worried about whether the Irish language would survive in Portland at all. His children seemed to prefer to speak English to each other, and especially among their closest school friends. Coley had once queried his sympathetic wife, would Portland, Maine be the place where our priceless heritage would finally be lost? Only John, his eldest, had a smattering of the Gaelic language, the beloved and musical verse that had been spoken by countless generations of Folans well into the distant past.
That man knows how to read. And so does this woman. Morgan Callan Rogers has been a friend of mine for well over 30 years. I first met her when I was teaching at USM with Bud McGrath, and she was editor of the student newspaper. We also traveled to Ireland together, she as a student and me as an assistant with the UCG summer school, and had great times over there. And her friendship has remained all through these years. She's an accomplished writer herself, Red Ruby Heart in a Cold Blue Sea, and most recently written On My Heart. So Morgan has not told me what she's going to read, but she knows.
I've been sitting in that seat all night wondering if you would be able to hear me or see me. And one thing they didn't tell me about old age is that you get shorter and shorter. I want to say a few words about Michael. These are nice words, Michael. Michael and I tease each other terribly. I've known Michael since I was in my early 30s. As he said, we traveled together in Ireland and laughed a lot, had a wonderful time. I even had a bit of a crush on him at one point, and then I met Becky and said, no, out of my league. He encouraged me to teach. He encouraged me to write. He encourages me to sing. He encourages me in every way possible, the way a good friend should. He has made me believe in myself a lot more than I would have had I not had him in my life, and I am grateful for that. And that is the last thing I will say that is really nice about you, without teasing you.
Thank you, Morgan. We'll see you later.
I am so proud and honored to be here tonight. I want to mention a ghost that's in this room. I picked the second chapter. It is about Mary Folan. And just reading this book and reading what the immigrants went through to come here and just to be here and live and grow and prosper, and here we are today. How did they do that? I'm so amazed, so amazed. So the ghost in the room is sitting down in the front seat. She's about 90 pounds. And she has a little smile on her face because she's sitting down front with the pretty people. Her name is Claire Foley. And I am sure she was a huge inspiration for this book. And the stories that Claire could tell you about her life scared the Jesus out of me. What a woman, what a strong woman in a tiny package. So again, I just wanted to mention Claire. I wanted to thank Michael, congratulate him. And I chose the second chapter, some passages from the second chapter that introduces Mary Folan, Coley's wife. Chapter 2 is called Mother of Pearl. Buy hyacinths to feed thy soul. Abalone, mother of pearl. Such exotic sounding names ran through Mary's mind, but they hardly seemed exaggerated. Abalone. What a beautiful yet appropriate sound for such a lovely object. Mary was daydreaming. Together with her nightly ritual of searching for restful sleep, these early morning hours were Mary's only times to be alone. She cherished being alone with her thoughts, and along with this came some degree of peace and rare stillness. Each morning, she would make her first cup of tea, wrap herself warmly in her Galway shawl, and sit in the parlor quietly admiring her sole possession. It was a piece of art, a reverse painting done directly on glass in a beautifully ornate wooden frame. It had cost her a pretty penny, more than she should have spent and more than she would have otherwise allowed herself to spend under normal circumstances. But now, at times like this, when she could be alone in the brief moments of an early morning stillness, Mary felt that her extravagance had been repaid time and again, and that she had truly gotten value for her money. Mary's eldest son, John, the scholar in the family, had once shared with her a poem that his class had learned when they were grammar students at the North School near the base of Munjoy Hill. Mary loved that Johnny always seemed to enjoy learning and reciting poems. To Coley, however, this was a waste of time. A poem has no practical value, and it's no way to bring money into the house, an opinion that Coley had emphatically claimed more than once. But this particular poem had impressed both mother and son, even though it was neither Old Irish nor Old English, for that matter. It's from something called Sanskrit, Johnny explained to his incredulous mother. Whatever that means when you're home, Mary uttered when she first heard the name of this ancient language. It remained a total mystery. Johnny told his mother that his teacher, a Miss Florence Vos, was an old Yankee spinster. She loved music and poetry and taught both of these in a way that made her students love them too. Miss Vos told her eager young scholars, "This poem has been translated into English from an ancient language of India, but it still speaks to me over hundreds of years and thousands of miles." Miss Vos called this a universal truth. Johnny told Mary that this short poem was one of his favorites and that he would remember it forever, even though it was neither by Longfellow, Portland's own famous bard, nor from the Bible. These were the two most common sources for verse then being taught in Portland's public schools. Johnny, in turn, had passed on his love of English language poetry to his mother. Although unable to read or write in English, Mary had an abiding love for all types of words, their sounds, their meanings, and their orderliness. Mary memorized this poem from the Sanskrit on the spot, coached along by her Johnny, who had to decipher one or two unusual bits of vocabulary for her, just as they had been equally loving deciphered for him earlier. Ever since, Mary had often murmured the short verse to herself, almost like a mantra. It had a deeply personal meaning for her, coming as it did from her eldest. Now that she understood the precise meaning of each of the individual words, her enjoyment only heightened, especially now as she regarded her own glorious piece of art on the wall. If of thy mortal goods thou art bereft, unto thy humble store 2 loaves alone to thee are left. Sell one, and with the dole buy hyacinths to feed thy soul. To Mary, her painting represented her hyacinths, flowers that neither faded nor ever needed the nourishment of water, but which still gave both comfort and strength to her body and soul as she began each day. She wondered sometimes what kind of a scholar she might have been if ever she had been given the chance. Caring for her children came first, but even so, Mary envied the little ones for their wonderful opportunity to learn. I would have mastered poetry at the very least, she now boasted to her reverse painting, her silent but attentive audience of one. From the moment she'd first laid eyes on this exquisitely framed painting, it reminded Mary of Moynish, her island home off the western coast of County Galway, Ireland. The colors were just right. The verdant greens in rich and multiple shades, the mountains in the back room, just like Connemara's 12 Pins, and the house constructed of native stone and situated beside, in Irish literally, at the foot of the sea, as they would have said at home. The children, especially the youngest, often asked their mother to tell them again and again the story behind the picture. Even after hearing it dozens of times, they persisted. Tell us the story again, Mama. Tell us how you swimmed all the way from Ireland, they exaggerated, as a mother always did in her grand telling of the now familiar story. On those evenings when she didn't feel up to repeating the story yet again, Mary would make them last with doggerel verse or scraps of nonsense. As a ritualistic telling of the familiar story unfolded, the elegant painting with its mother-of-pearl luminescence became a sort of talisman for the Folans in America. Mary's reverse painting had by now transcended into the tangible and visible image that connected the new with the old. Mary told the revered tale with such conviction and strength that even her eldest children sometimes wondered if it wasn't actually true. Mary's story would always follow the same familiar framework. This was our family's home in Galway over many generations. One night, after all were asleep, I slowly crawled through the hole at the base of the stone wall, crept quietly to the edge of the sea, swam out to the Galway hooker in the bay, and sailed all the way over to America. This represented the bare bones of the story, but it could be embellished to any degree necessary for any occasion. And wasn't Mary just the natural storyteller to deliver the tale with the grace and energy that it so richly deserved? In reality, the true story of Mary Joyce's emigration was far less romantic and more fraught with difficulty. Thank you for these words, Michael. It was a pleasure to read them.
Good evening, and with my name being Hitchcock, would you have expected any other greeting? It's really wonderful to have so many people here this evening to join with Michael in celebrating the launch of his book, Murky Overhead. He's hoping that you all buy a copy. But thank you all for being here. As you've heard, Michael has collected these stories essentially and probably all of his life. He likes to call his novel historical fiction, but I like to call it fictional nonfiction because most all of these stories are true and these things really happened. But like in that old TV show, Dragnet, Michael changed the names to protect the innocent. Morgan has read you the story about Mary and her reverse painting, which Michael showed you a picture of in the film strip that we watched. Also, hopefully you've had a chance to look at the really beautiful oil painting by our local artist, Holly Reedy, which became the cover of the book. But what's really special, and what none of you know, and what Michael doesn't know, is that Holly Reedy agreed to sell the painting to me. And tonight I'd like to gift it to Michael. So it,
That'd be a price I pay for that.
so it can hang in our home with the other one, the reverse painting, which you saw the picture of. So you get to take that home with you tonight,
And
Michael.
you too.
So again, thank you all for being here.
This is the conclusion of the formal part of the presentation today. I hope you've all enjoyed yourselves. I certainly have. I hope you have. And what a fitting way to end. Kevin and I have known each other for years and years. Starting here in Portland, going down to Boston. I've been either following him or he's been following me all over the place. And the times that we've had together and the friends that we've made and the music that we've heard, this is the real stuff. I mean, this is the real McCoy, the real Irish traditional stuff that you're getting. And I thought that we'd just end with a song, and after that, I'll be going back down to the end of the building to sign any books for those of you who haven't received them already. And I was just reminded on television today that there's only 106 more shopping days before Christmas. So of all the songs to pick, Kevin has picked one that was very special to me because the person who took me to a semester at sea, along with Becky for the first time, Max Brand of Saco, Maine, studied ethnomusicology at Queen's University with a professor of Lancashire. And Kevin got this song from one of his relatives. So it's called The Rambling Irishman, and that's what this man is here. Kevin's our chorus.
There's a chorus, so you have to sing along with the chorus as it comes through. And Mike and I go way back, and I think it's safe to say that our connection to our Irish heritage, to our father, has been something that joined us together. My great-grandfather immigrated from Confermana, and he was 19 years old when he entered the Union Army and fought in Massachusetts 8th Artillery at Antietam and Sharpsburg, and was not a physical casualty, but a mental casualty of the war, and actually ended up at Togus for the veterans from here in Maine. So there's a connection there too. So the Rambling Irishman. I am a rambling Irishman. In Ulster I was born in. Many's the happy hour I spent on the banks of sweet Loch Ewan. To live poor I could not endure, like others of my station. To America I sailed away and left this Irish nation. Of course, right on Tindana, right on Tindalore and the Nandi triad. Right on Tindana, right on Tindalore and the Nandi. The night before I sailed away, I spent it with my darling from 3 o'clock in the afternoon to the break of day next morning. When that we were going
brother's arms, and you may be sure, very sure, it wounded both our charms. Right Tantindana, right first night I spent on board, I dreamt about my Nancy. I dreamt that I held her in my arms, and well, she pleased my fancy. But when I woke out of my dream, I found my berth was empty. You may be sure, and very sure, that I lay discontented. Right Tantindana, right Tantindanur and Nandi. And we arrived at the other side, and we filled our buckets for customs. We cast our anchor in the bay, going down to good old Boston. Let every lad link with his lass, blue jacket and white trousers. Let every lass link with her lad, new petticoat and white flounces. Right Tantindana, right Tantindano and Nandi. Tantindana, right Tantindano and Nandi.